Part 2, The Middle Class. Chapter 7. Confessions of a Former Purse Junkie. I've been talking about my scarcity mindset and how it impacted me. But the truth is, I haven't always been good with money. Sometimes immigrants like me who escaped poverty in developing countries experience what I call the immigrant money rebound effect. First, the initial shock upon discovering the abundance of the first world. Holy Christ, it's a can of Coke. Second, as the family transitions to middle class, the realization that your hard-earned money isn't going to be confiscated by the government. I can spend this on whatever I want. Third, the self-destructive foray into Western-style overconsumption. I'm going to buy all the things. After getting my first full-time job, I realized that, among women, purses are a symbol of wealth. Whenever my colleagues paraded their Louis Vuittons around the office, our female co-workers would treat them like the Queen of England, cooing and stroking their monogrammed trophies. Purses were a sign of success. Since I was successful, I reasoned, I wanted, no, deserved, one. I decided that Coach was my brand and proceeded to become an absolute scholar of their product line. I knew how to spot fakes. I could tell where a purse was made based on its serial code. I could instantly identify the exact make and model hanging off a stranger's arm from 20 feet away. I was obsessed. Every time I bought one, I would do this definitely not crazy thing where I'd stick my entire face inside it and inhale deeply. New purse smell. One day, my husband, Bryce, came back from work to find me sitting in front of the computer, my eyes glued to the screen. I gestured him over. This is a genuine Penelope with jacquard fabric and all brass hardware. He stared at me like I had grown a second head. What the hell are you talking about? Come look. I insisted. An 18-year-old girl was oohing over the Coach Penelope leather satchel while carefully removing it from its box like a newborn baby. Is this the entire video? Bryce asked, incredulous. She's just unboxing a purse. I didn't respond. I was too busy inputting my credit card information. I know now that I had a full-blown addiction. Shopping is the easiest and fastest way to get a hit of dopamine, the pleasure hormone. Since this is the same chemical that's released when we eat tasty things, have sex, do drugs, or accomplish something we're proud of, I was hooked. Just pull out your wallet. You don't need to push through the boredom and frustration of mastering a skill, face the ups and downs of nurturing a human relationship, or do anything. We'll talk more about the neurological reasons why this happens in Chapter 8. In short, buying Coach had turned me into a lab rat. It was as if an electrode connected my brain to a big red button, and every time I pushed it, my pleasure receptors would light up. It was so easy. I bought 5 purses in the span of a few weeks. Every time, I'd purr over my new purchase for a couple of days. But those jolts of happiness were short-lived. I'd inevitably get bored and start shopping for a new one. The hunt was intoxicating, but the good feels never lasted. Many immigrants I know have experienced something similar. It's like driving a starving man to a golden corral he may just eat himself to death. I almost did. But one day, as I was fawning over yet another bag, out of the corner of my eye I saw something, a half-finished Coke. I had been drinking it when the doorbell rang, and I had abandoned it as soon as the delivery person arrived, bearing my latest acquisition. Something inside me broke. When I had arrived in this country, a Coke can had been my most precious possession. And here I was, 2 decades later, treating it like an afterthought. All because of an empty bag. I didn't like who I had become. I put down my new bag and cancelled my order for the next one. Then I finished that damn Coke. Your past doesn't define you. One of the best pieces of life advice I have ever gotten was from a man named Mario Haddad. Mario was Bryce's new manager at a computer chip design company, and Bryce was heading to San Jose, California, to meet him for the first time. Bryce had heard that Mario was unusual and that in Silicon Valley, he was known as the fixer, someone they sent in whenever shit hit the fan. Bryce spent his flight wondering, what's he like? What's his deal? Is he a psychopath? Shockingly common in upper management, there's always dirt somewhere. When you're high up in the chain, you're bound to have pissed someone off. But it seemed like everyone from sales to customer support to corporate to the engineers loved Mario, and those 4 never agree on anything. After Bryce met Mario, it all came into focus. A major client had threatened to pull their $100 million contract because their servers were down, and the product was to blame. Everyone had been running around, calling senseless meetings and finger-pointing, desperate to save their jobs. With all the commotion, no one was focused on actually fixing the problem. Then Mario arrived. Guys, it doesn't matter whose fault it is, so I don't care. What do we do now? Immediately, everyone shut up. Because Mario didn't care about assigning blame, Bryce's co-workers were stunned into silence as their brains slowly switched from politician mode back to engineering mode. Every time someone started dredging up past mistakes, even if it was the CEO, Mario shut it down and kept everyone moving forward. By the end of the crisis, people who had been at each other's throats were patting each other on the back for pulling together. When Bryce asked Mario how he learned this mindset, Mario replied, "I grew up in a war zone." Mario is Lebanese, and from the 1970s to the early 2000s, Lebanon's history can be summarized as a mixture of horrible civil war and horrible regular war. When a bomb obliterates a building or explodes in a crowded marketplace, you don't have the luxury of dwelling on the past. Questions like why did we have to come to the market today? And why did we choose to live in this neighborhood? Are pointless. In that moment, you have 2 choices. 1. Pick up a bucket and help put the fire out. 2. Watch more people die. Fortunately, Mario's family managed to immigrate to America. Now the only bombs he has to deal with are of the JA-currency variety, but those experiences shaped him permanently and gave us a life-changing piece of advice: the past doesn't matter. What do we do now? When readers complain about their finances, their regrets always feature prominently in their excuses. I'm in too much debt. I picked the wrong degree. I'm too old to change. I get it. You've made mistakes. mistakes. I have, too. We're all human. But the difference between successful people and everyone else is that successful people, like Mario, don't spend time on what-ifs. They spend that time finding a solution. Don't worry about how far you've fallen. Keep climbing. If you're in debt, didn't pick a degree with a good pot score, or just feel stuck, repeat after me, the past doesn't matter. What do we do now? The past doesn't matter. My friend Joe's dad was a successful businessman in Thailand and his mother a college professor. When Joe was just 12 years old, his dad's electronics retail business failed and the whole family immigrated to the United States to start over. They arrived with only 3 suitcases and hardly any English to work unstable minimum wage jobs. Joe's dad took midnight shifts at a gas station, delivered pizza, and picked up odd jobs. Their entire family of 5 slept in one room. Their lowest point came one day when Joe's dad was out on a pizza delivery. A customer refused to pay, and when Joe's dad didn't give him the pizza, the man attacked him with a baseball bat. At first, Joe's dad refused to go to the hospital because he had no health insurance, but the pain got so bad he paid out of pocket for surgery on his broken arm. After this, the bottom fell out. Joe's dad couldn't drive with one arm in a cast. Both of Joe's parents were now unemployed. They almost gave up and moved back to Thailand. But one day, their luck changed. Joe's mom found a Thai restaurant for sale, a 45-minute drive away from their home. The seller was going through a divorce and, desperate to cash out, agreed to cut his price down to $9,000 from $16,500. Because Joe's parents had lived so frugally, they were able to come up with the $5,000 down payment. They had no experience running a restaurant, but Joe's dad was determined to make it work. He learned how to cook, and his wife ran the front. The kids helped out in the evenings and on weekends, and that hole-in-the-wall restaurant eventually put them all through college. Joe's dad could have dwelled on the mistakes he had made in Thailand with his business or wondered why he hadn't just given up that stupid pizza. But he didn't. He was too focused on his next move. Let me also tell you about Bill. Back in 2002, Bill was a 21-year-old college student who loved to party. Having tried pretty much every drug known to man, he was also the dealer for his friends. One night, he brought some drugs to a party, got high, and then went home to sleep. The next day, hungover from the night's debauchery, he called his friend to head to class. But it was his buddy's roommate who picked up the phone, and he was yelling, "He's dead! He's dead!" Turns out the drugs he brought to that party had been, unbeknownst to him, laced with fentanyl, which had killed his friend in his sleep. "You have to get out of there now." Bill sprinted into the hallway, but he didn't get far. At the end of the corridor was a pair of cops, handcuffs in hand. Bill was convicted of reckless homicide by delivery of a controlled substance and sentenced to 10 years in jail. On that day, multiple lives were turned upside down and 2 families destroyed by his recklessness. Bill thought his life was over. By the time he'd be released, he'd be 31, And what kind of a future is there for a 31-year-old ex-con with no college degree? But Bill didn't give up. After getting out of prison in 2012, Bill started from the bottom. He went back to school, then got a $9 an hour job stacking boxes. After that, he began selling sporting apparel. A lot of doors were slammed in his face. Eventually he managed to earn $1,000 one month, then $1,500 the next. He's now managed to amass $250,000 in net worth and teaches others about finances and how to come back from a massive failure on his blog Wealth Well Done. Bill's story is proof that you can come back from anything. He could have wasted his time in prison blaming the cops, blaming his luck, blaming society, but he didn't. He made a horrible mistake, got taught a brutal lesson and came back stronger. He is the epitome of Mario's approach. If you picked the wrong degree, or didn't get a degree, and are living paycheck to paycheck, it's not the end of the world. It's time to roll up your sleeves. The only thing you can control is what you do now. There is always a way out. The key is to remember, the past doesn't matter. What do we do now? Chapter 8. The Dope on Dopamine. I refer to my time as a purse junkie as a mistake, but I don't regret it. What I learned completely changed my approach to money and happiness. I meticulously researched my first bag, spending hours on YouTube. When I made my purchase, a lime green Penelope shopper, my heart was bursting with excitement. This was the first fancy thing I had ever owned, officially marking my entry into the middle class. I stayed up all night, smelling the fabric and caressing the leather, whispering, "My precious." You know what? When I write it out, it sounds nuts, so let's move on. That first purchase made me legitimately happy. But my second bag, a gold Ashley carry-all, didn't. I was so confused. I had spent just as much time researching it and spent just as much money, but it wasn't the same. I didn't get that same high. By the time I was on to bag 5, it was such a non-event I don't even remember it. Soon, I got so bored of my purses I sold or gave away all but one. I had inadvertently gotten on the hedonic treadmill. When we buy something special or get a raise, we're happy because we perceive a positive change in our life. Similarly, when something bad happens, like a blown tire or a health issue, that negative change bums us out. But over time, we get used to the new normal and return to our baseline level of happiness. Psychologists Philip Brickman, Dan Coates, and Ronnie Janoff-Perlman first noticed this phenomenon in a 1978 study in which they tracked the happiness levels of two groups, lottery winners and recently injured paraplegics. As expected, the lottery winners reported a much higher level of happiness than the control group, and the paraplegics a much lower level. But over time, both groups adapted to their circumstances, and after a year their self-reported happiness returned to the levels at which they were before their lives had changed. Happiness is relative. Understanding that not only explains the diminishing returns of luxury purse buying, it applies in all areas of your life. In the 1970s, Vicki Robin, author of the New York Times bestseller Your Money or Your Life, began running the finance seminars that made her a household name. She would ask the audience to write down how much they earned and how much they thought they needed to earn to be happy. On average, people thought they needed double what they earned. It didn't matter if they made $30,000 or $100,000, the threshold was relative to their current salary. So, are we simply incapable of being satisfied with our lot? On the surface, it seems so, but as I dug deeper, I realized that the hedonic treadmill on which no matter how much we run, we always stay in place is more than a psychological phenomenon. It's biochemical. Blame your brain. Your brain is a complex machine and neuroscientists are only beginning to understand it. What neuroscientists do understand pretty well is the mesolimbic pathway, which is part of the reward system in the brain. It contains pathways that trigger feelings like cravings, hunger, desire, and pleasure. The mesolimbic pathway incentivizes us to seek food when we're hungry and water when we're thirsty. It's also responsible for the positive reinforcement we feel when we get them. Which brings us to dopamine. Dopamine, the pleasure chemical, is the main neurotransmitter coursing through the mesolimbic pathway. When something good happens, dopamine gets released and we feel pleasure. At least, that's what we've been led to believe. In reality, it's a bit more complicated. The mesolimbic pathway also contains a structure responsible for processing dopamine called the nucleus accumbens, which houses neural pathways sensitive to dopamine. These are the real gateways to pleasure and happiness. This distinction is why the narrative of more dopamine equals more happiness isn't actually true. In 2006, neurologists in Germany conducted an experiment on the nucleus accumbens. What they found explained the hedonic treadmill. Subjects were asked to play a game of identifying simple objects like circles and triangles. If they won, they'd get €1. If they lost, they got nothing. Before starting they were given a percentage likelihood of winning. You would think that people would be pumped if they won money no matter what, right? Wrong. Turns out, if people were given a high chance, like 100% of winning, when they did, inflammatory showed no additional activity in the nucleus accumbens' dopaminergic receptors. Conversely, if they had a low chance of winning, like 25%, and they did, the fMRI showed a spike of activity in those same dopaminergic receptors. Conversely, if the person was given a high probability of winning, like 75%, and they didn't, the fMRI showed a decrease in dopamine activity. The nucleus accumbens reacts to both the presence of a positive stimulus and also the expectation of that stimulus. In other words, pleasure isn't based on an absolute level of dopamine in the brain, but rather on the relative level versus the expected level of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. Relative, not absolute. Yay for cocaine. The results were published in an academic paper titled Prediction Error as a Linear Function of Reward Probability is Coded in Human Nucleus Accumbens. This title both amuses and nauseates me, as a former engineer and current writer, in its complete inaccessibility. Anyway, as boring as all the scientific terms are, this is one of the few attempts to study the brain's reward system as it relates to finances. In fact, We only know as much as we do about the human mesolimbic pathway because of research done in the context of addiction studies. Specifically, cocaine studies, funded by the DEA, CDC, and WHO, to understand and treat drug addicts. So, yay for cocaine. Cocaine, amphetamines, and other drugs operate by disrupting dopamine reuptake and reabsorption, causing the chemical to overwhelm the mesolimbic pathway and overstimulate its pleasure centers to the point of madness. But because the nucleus accumbens is involved, your brain resets to the new normal. That's why the next time a cocaine user takes a hit, the high isn't as strong. Their baseline has recalibrated. They need more cocaine to get the same high. Two things can happen next. Either the user gets bored by the decreasing effectiveness of the drugs and stops using it, or they double down. Every addict knows that experience as chasing their first high. The hedonic treadmill works the same way. Each time you spend money on a big-ticket item, you get a little high, because your nucleus accumbens is detecting a change for the better. But after you buy that purse, or that TV, or that Xbox, it acclimatizes. Your level of pleasure steadily declines with each new purchase of a similar item while the stimulus remains the same. Your brain's expectations have increased. Not all spending is created equal. Here's the part where I'm supposed to scold people who spend too much money. Sorry to disappoint. The lesson here isn't exactly what you may think. Once I figured out what was happening, I realized that this diminishing happiness effect only applied to possessions and not to experiences. Maybe it's because I spent most of my childhood stuck in small towns, but I've always loved to travel. When we were working, Bryce and I would plan 2 vacations a year to Europe or the Caribbean, with the bill for each averaging $2,500 a not chump change, by any means. And I had a great time, every time. We looked forward to our next vacation, reading travel guides and watching No Reservations. And then the day would come and we'd be like, wow, we're in Rome. Afterward, we'd go through our photos over and over and compare notes of our warm, fuzzy memories. The point is, it always felt worth it. That spending didn't have the same drop-off that spending on stuff did, so we kept doing it. Around that time, I started to notice a strange pattern among my friends and family, which was later reinforced when I started my blog and readers emailed me their financial situation to analyze. The more stuff people owned, the unhappier and more stressed they tended to be. Conversely, the less stuff people owned and the more they spent on experiences like travel or learning new skills, the happier and more content they were. Possessions give you an initial burst of dopamine that fades as your nucleus accumbens acclimatizes, causing you to continuously chase that high. People who spend on experiences get way more bang for their buck. Stuff tends to snowball, too. I have a friend who collects art, but it's never just about the piece. He also has to pay for it to be framed, reinforce a wall in his condo so it's strong enough to support it, buy special lights to display it the way the artist intended, ensure it. The list goes on and on. And every time he finds out about a new expense, he flies into a rage about the scuzzy vendors taking advantage of him. Not all spending is created equal. Unless you are in true dire straits, day-to-day expenses like rent, groceries, heating, electricity, etc. don't tend to bring you great happiness or unhappiness. At a certain point, they blend into the background. These are baseline costs. Spending increases your happiness when it brings something new to your life, whether that's a possession or an experience. These are splurges. However, that happiness is temporary for possessions but not for experiences. Some spending decreases your happiness. These expenses like insurance and maintenance are necessary when you own things. Nobody enjoys spending money on a flooded basement or a flat tire. They are unexpected costs. When I was growing up, I thought the key to happiness was more stuff. If one Coke could make me so happy, then 30 Cokes should make me 30 times as happy. But the truth is, if someone had given me 30 Cokes, I would have panicked and started digging a hole under our chicken coop to hide my fortune from my neighbors. Then I would have sat on my porch, forever on guard for anyone who looked suspicious to keep them from murdering me and my family to steal my reserves. That's the problem with possessions. You get the initial bump, but then it fades, and if that possession is expensive, you worry about it. If it breaks, you have to spend money to fix it. If, for example, one of the chickens pecked open one of the Coke cans, I would have had to kill the chicken. Then I'd have been down 1 can of Coke and 1 chicken, which we would have had to pay money to replace. Possessions convert splurges into unexpected costs. Think of my friend the art collector. His initial purchase gave him a burst of happiness. But over time, that happiness faded because his nucleus accumbens acclimatized. When the expensive purchase caused him to spend money to ensure and maintain it, the spending didn't make him happy. It had the exact opposite effect. But now let's look at someone who spends money on experiences. Since every experience is different, your happiness spikes each time. Not only that, once the experience is over, you don't own anything, and as a result you don't need to protect it. So, you don't get that conversion of splurge to unexpected cost spending. Not all cuts hurt. This realization lit up my brain with possibilities. If all spending isn't created equal, does that mean not all cuts in spending will hurt? If certain expenditures don't increase your happiness, doesn't that mean eliminating them won't affect it one way or the other? If certain expenditures decrease your happiness, wouldn't eliminating them make you happier? Everyone thinks budgeting is like being on a diet. If you spend less, you're less happy. But in actuality, certain spending doesn't decrease your happiness. In other words, not all cuts hurt. One summer in Toronto, the Transit Commission, which runs the subways, decided to go on strike. For weeks, the city's subway system ground to a halt and TV stations filled with angry Canadians. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, watch out. Rather than pay for taxis daily, I decided to jog to work. To my surprise, it didn't take as long, nor was it as difficult as I'd imagined. I even lost weight and was able to cancel my gym membership. So, when the TTC got back online, I continued jogging to work, saving almost $200 every month that summer. I felt physically amazing and loved seeing those extra dollars in my bank account. Remember the closet exercise from chapter 2? I asked you to track your clothing usage for a month to sort out what you're actually wearing regularly. Now pretend that a fire started in your closet and destroyed your clothes. If you lost the stuff on the left, well, you barely wore them anyway. You might be bummed, but it wouldn't really affect your day-to-day life. Conversely, if you lost all the clothes to the right, you would feel it. They were the pieces you wore every day. Whenever you picked an outfit, you'd miss the ones that got burned up. Not all spending is created equal. And as a result, not all cuts are created equal. Some cuts hurt deeply. Others don't hurt at all. This time it's personal. I have a confession to make. I find personal finance books annoying. They tend to make you feel bad about spending money, berating you for buying a cup of coffee every morning. If only you'd invest it, that $3.50 would be worth $100,000 in 30 years. Bull. Shit. While I don't doubt the math, universal advice like that is idiotic. Some people don't care about coffee, like me. But other people love it. It truly makes their day better. I'm from Sichuan province, where all our food is covered in chili oil. If someone told me that not eating spicy foods would extend my life expectancy, I'd respond, why would I want to live a longer life without my favorite food? The secret to budgeting is not to imitate some template but to find the budget that works for you. Step 1. Eliminate baseline costs that don't make you happy. First, find the easy stuff. Pore over your monthly expenses and look for spending that can be easily eliminated without any real hit to your quality of life. Bank fees are a good example. By opening accounts at zero-fee online banks or credit unions, you can eliminate bank fees, which will make you feel awesome. Give it a shot. Sometimes you'll find spending you weren't even aware of. I once had a friend discover she was still paying for hosting for a website she no longer owned. Here are a few suggestions to get you started. Bank fees, subscriptions to things you no longer use, cable packages for channels you don't watch, landline, who uses landlines anymore? Step 2, eliminate baseline costs that hurt but you'll get used to. Next, find ways to make expense cuts that may cause you some amount of discomfort but you'll get used to. For me, it was jogging to work. For you, it may be cooking at home, biking to work, or buying used things instead of new. There will be an adjustment period, but once your nucleus accumbens kicks in, your happiness level will return to baseline. There are some expenses that you'll find simply can't be cut without permanently affecting your general well-being. If for whatever reason I lost access to spicy Sichuan food, my happiness level would look like this. Finding the appropriate expenses to cut for your personal situation is the key to successful budgeting. None of this just quit buying coffee crap. Your spending is personal and specific to you, and no book can tell you exactly what to do, no matter how hard they tried to convince you. The only way to find out is to try it and give it some time. If you find yourself missing that thing too much, undo it. Here are a few items that may fall under this category. buying lunch at work, eating out, going out with friends, gym membership. Step 3. Reduce the expensive things you own that cost you money. In this step, we take a hard look at the expensive items you own. Specifically, things that cost you money to maintain, insure, repeatedly fill up with premium gas, etc. The goal is to reduce or eliminate unexpected costs as much as possible. The two most common items people own that contribute to their unexpected costs are their car and their home. Let's talk about cars for a minute. Readers often write in to say how they try to save and be responsible, but bad things continue happening to keep them from getting ahead. Digging deeper, often it turns out that their over-reliance on their cars is the cause of their bad luck. Not only do cars decrease in value the second you drive them off the lot, they are money sinks. One blown radiator can destroy months of diligent saving. Sometimes, people misinterpret my advice as meaning they have to get rid of their cars. Not so. Remember, most of a car's unexpected costs are dependent on miles driven rather than ownership of the car itself. Gas and maintenance costs go down the less you drive, and you can reduce your insurance premiums if you don't drive every day. If you can find a way to use your car less by, say, biking to work or taking public transportation, you can keep your car while reducing most of its unexpected costs. Plus, it's good for the environment and your waistline. The goal is to turn this. A house is the second major item in this category, but housing is such a big topic that we devoted an entire chapter to it, Chapter 9. In short, people justify the unexpected costs of owning a house by pointing out that houses tend to appreciate in value, so the costs are always offset by this investment, while renting is throwing money away. We'll debunk this myth in the next chapter. Step 4, add splurges. By the time you've reached this step, you've gone through your spending and found what you can cut painlessly. You've also realized what you can't live without and added it back. Finally, you've looked at your most expensive items, cars, mainly, and either reduced your reliance on them or eliminated them completely. Now let's have some fun. Add up all the spending you've cut. Then take a part of that and allocate it towards splurges. You don't have to decide what you're going to spend it on. In fact, it's better if you don't, so you can make it spontaneous. But this is fun money you can do whatever you want with. For me, this usually means traveling, but it could be anything. Want to go to a concert? Go for it. Go scuba diving? Sure. Go to Vegas for a wild weekend? Well, clear it with your significant other first, but why the hell not? I would encourage you to splurge on experiences over possessions to get lasting happiness, but it's up to you. As long as the amount allocated is less than the amount you saved by cutting, then you have successfully saved money while increasing happiness. Understand your brain. Understand your budget. Budgeting does not have to be the soul-sucking chore that everyone thinks it is, because budgeting isn't simply about cutting. You just need to understand two truths about the human brain, namely, how you derive satisfaction from your spending is determined by your brain. Everyone's brain is different. The process of finding your optimal budget is different for everyone. My budget will not work for you and vice versa. but by understanding the link between dopamine, happiness, and spending, and by following the steps outlined in this chapter, you will hopefully take a budget that looks like this: the budget of a typical consumer who owns too much and is perpetually unhappy because of high baseline costs and unexpected costs. And turn it into this: one with low baseline costs, no unexpected costs, and lots of happiness producing splurges. In the process, you will discover the most efficient way of turning dollars into dopamine that works for you and you alone. If you're anything like me, you will find it incredibly liberating, and you'll be happier and healthier, with more money than you ever thought possible. Now on to something a bit controversial. It's time to talk about why owning a home sucks. Chapter 8 Summary. Spending money is addictive because our brains reset our expectations and we no longer get the same amount of dopamine with repeated spending. There are 3 different types of spending: baseline costs, day-to-day costs that you get used to, like rent or utilities. These don't increase or decrease your happiness. Splurges, an occasional purchase that makes you happier. Unexpected costs to fix something that's gone wrong. These decrease your happiness. How people budget varies per individual. You have to experiment and see for yourself which cuts hurt and which don't. To find a budget that works for you, Step 1. Eliminate baseline costs that don't make you happy. Step 2. Eliminate baseline costs that may hurt to get rid of but that you'll get used to living without. Step 3. Eliminate as many unexpected costs as you can by reducing high-maintenance things you own. Step 4. Add splurges back into your life. Chapter 9. Your house is not an investment. I've talked a lot about my upbringing already, and you might be thinking there were a lot of ugly moments. Please understand, it's not my intention to depict my culture as being all about physical abuse and abandonment issues. There are downsides as well. Namely, our attitude toward housing. As we discussed, when famine and instability can instantly destroy your sense of peace, your approach to money naturally becomes conservative. We don't waste anything. We hoard our savings. We fear debt. These attitudes have generally served us well in helping us become resilient as we assimilate into new communities and cultures. But all these lessons fly right out the window when it comes to housing. In Chinese culture, a house is the be-all end-all status symbol and the only thing we throw our hard-earned money at. It's also the only thing that we are willing to go into debt for. I've seen friends who spend hours clipping coupons to save $1 off toilet paper overspend by hundreds of thousands of dollars on a condo, caught up in the excitement of a bidding war. This obsession is anything but benign. Our hatred of debt, our ability to live on almost nothing, and our emphasis on education are powerful tools that allow tons of immigrants like my family to escape poverty. But it's still rare for those same immigrant families to become truly rich. The reason for this, as it turns out, is housing. My own parents, who lived through a famine, who survived on used $0.44 a day for years, started asking me a few weeks after I had graduated when I was going to buy a home. And they've never stopped asking. At the time, I didn't know better either, so after I settled into my first full-time job, my then boyfriend, Bryce, and I started to look for a house. The terror of the housing market. I've been through a few legitimately terrifying experiences in my life. Facing my kindergarten teacher was one of them. Being trapped in a high school with a suspected gunman was another. But all of that pales in comparison to shopping for a house. I grew up counting pennies. Now I was being asked to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, all at once, based on a 10-minute open house. I hadn't been working that long and that amount of money seemed unimaginable. And here's what really irritated me, what I could get didn't even seem that good. How much would it cost if the roof needed repairs in the next year? I asked one real estate agent. Oh, maybe $10,000. Maybe more. And would this be covered under a warranty of some sort? He chuckled. That's not how things work. What was most surprising was how accepting everyone was of these asinine conditions. My friends and colleagues who wouldn't have bought a cell phone without a 1-year warranty were gladly signing on to 30 years of debt with no guarantee that their house wasn't being held together with duct tape. As I said, even my parents got in on the act. You have to stop being so picky, my mom would say, sliding a flyer across the table. Here's one your dad and I found for you. The same woman who beat me for costing her $30 to replace a house key wanted me to spend $800,000. My uneasiness came to a head with what I like to call the scary house. In my neighborhood, there was a house that looked possessed. Someone had put up signs in front about secret government drones and written UFO across the windows in red paint. Or at least I hope it was red paint. One day, we noticed holes, 6 feet deep, all around the property. I thought, welp, this house is going to be on the news tonight. As we hurried past, then a for sale sign appeared in the front yard. Who the hell is going to buy that thing? I asked Bryce. There are probably bodies buried underneath the floorboards. Not to mention the walls and roof were falling apart from neglect. A few days later, the sign had a sticker, sold for $500,000. I thought that was the stupidest thing I had ever seen, but it got worse. The buyer turned out to be a property flipper, who moved in with a crew and, over the course of a few weeks, did a half-assed renovation to make the house look superficially presentable and then put it back on the market. A few days later, sold for $800,000. Now I was pissed. Not only was real estate expensive, it was a scam. WHY houses are a shitty investment. Something about housing makes people insane. Even rational people like my parents turn into debt accumulating monsters. I don't blame them, though. The marketing, after all, is pretty slick. Renting is throwing your money away. Owning a home is investing in yourself. A man's home is his castle. They're not making any more land. Housing always goes up. We've all heard these lines. They sound reasonable, so we assume owning a home is a rite of passage into adulthood. But when I started looking into it after the scary house incident, what shocked me most was the math. Owning and not just buying your home is incredibly expensive. Note that even though my statistics are from the United States, The numbers are pretty much identical north of the border. Ready? Here we go. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the average American family stays in a home for about 9 years. The average American family also keeps the bulk of their net worth in their home, under the assumption that a house is a good investment that always increases in value. Let's see what happens to this average American family over these 9 years. Historically, housing tends to appreciate at the rate of inflation, but for the purposes of this example, let's give housing a big boost and say that it increases at the same rate as the stock market, an average annual rate of 6%. If this were to happen, then over 9 years a house purchased for $500,000 will increase to a value of $844,739, for a total gain of $344,739. By the time that family sells, they expect a nice fat check, and everyone is ecstatic. Awesome, right? Well, not quite. The problem is that owning a house costs money way beyond the purchase price. It costs money to buy, sell, finance, and appraise it, and to insure and maintain it each year, which we logically know but basically just dismiss when we're digging deep for that down payment. I did too, thinking, how much could that be? Turns out, a lot. First, there are fees involved in the purchase. Buyers have to pay for a title search at their land registry office, which costs an average of $100. Then to register their purchase, they have to pay a title recording fee of $150. In some states, they have to pay a lawyer to do this for them, which is about $1,000. So far, we're up to $1,250. Still sounds like small potatoes, doesn't it? Well, in the immortal words of Samuel L. Jackson in Jurassic Park, hold on to your butts. You have to insure a house. Rates vary by city and state, but the average national cost is about 0.5% of the home value, per year. This gets paid annually, so over 9 years that's $500,000 A tilde minus 0.5% A tilde, 9 equals $22,500. You have to pay property taxes. The average annual rate in the United States is about 1%. $500,000 A tilde minus 1% A tilde, 9 equals $45,000. This stuff is starting to add up, isn't it? And houses cost money to maintain. Roofs collapse, pipes burst, ghosts of Civil War soldiers haunt your cellar. Realtors recommend setting aside between 1% and 3% of your home value every year for maintenance. So conservatively, this would be $500,000 A tilde minus 1% A tilde, 9 equals $45,000. At the end of those 9 years, our average American family wants to sell. Selling costs money, too. First, you have to pay your real estate broker. A typical commission is 6%, which gets calculated on the final sale price, not the original purchase price. 6% of $844,739 is $50,684. Also, don't forget about land transfer taxes, which are paid to the city and can vary from almost nothing, 0.01% in Colorado, to ridiculously high, 4% in Pittsburgh. The national average is about 1.2%, and 1.2% of $844,739 is $10,137. And that damn lawyer fee of $1,000. You have to pay that again. If all these numbers are making your head spin, you aren't alone. Here's a summary of all these costs we've talked about. Title search, $100. Recording fee, $150. Lawyer fees, $1,000. A tilde, 2 equals $2,000. Insurance, $500,000. A tilde minus 0.5%. A tilde, 9 equals $22,500. Maintenance, $500,000. A tilde minus 1%. A tilde, 9 equals $45,000. Property tax, $500,000. A tilde minus 1%. A tilde, 9 equals $45,000. Broker commission, $844,739. 8 tilde minus 6% equals $50,684. Land transfer tax, $844,739. 8 tilde minus 1.2% equals $10,137. Total cost, $175,571. In total, this family has paid a whopping $175,571 just to own this house. So that $344,739 gain they were anticipating? 51% of it got eaten up. Your piece of the pie is only 49% of the total gain of the house. Maybe you're thinking, that's not so bad, that's still 6 figures of gain. Here's the thing. In this analysis, I've assumed that this family bought the house outright with a suitcase full of cash. As we know, almost no one does that. They borrow the money in the form of a mortgage. So, let's add that in. The typical down payment on a first-time home purchase is 10%, and to cover the balance, our family walked into their local bank and got a mortgage. As of 2018, the interest from this mortgage no longer makes sense to deduct, since the standard deduction got raised in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, so our family gets no tax break from loans of less than $600,000. After 9 years, our typical American family will have paid $162,033 of interest to their bank. That's money they're never getting back. So now let's add that onto our costs. Title search, $100. Recording fee, $150. Lawyer fees, $1,000. A tilde, 2 equals $2,000. Insurance, $500,000. A tilde minus 0.5%. A tilde, 9 equals $22,500. Maintenance, $500,000. A tilde minus 1%. A tilde, 9 equals $45,000. Property tax, $500,000. A tilde minus 1%. A tilde, 9 equals $45,000. Broker commission, $844,739. 8 tilde minus 6% equals $50,684. Land transfer tax, $844,739. 8 tilde minus 1.2% equals $10,137. Mortgage interest, $162,033. Total cost, $337,604. Our typical American family has now paid $337,604 for the pleasure of buying their home. That's 98% of the gain they were supposed to get. They're left with that tiny slice at the top, 2%. And remember, this is all based on the wildly optimistic assumption that their house will appreciate at the rate of the stock market, 6%, year after year. If their house appreciates any slower, then they're actually losing money. This is why the typical family who keeps the majority of their net worth in their property never accumulates much money. They think they're getting ahead as they see its value go up, but they don't realize that all the extra costs add up to the point where most of their gain has vanished. A house can be a great investment for real estate brokers, the government, insurance companies, and banks. Basically, for everyone except the owner. For the owner, a house is a terrible investment. Now, to be clear, I'm talking about primary residences. In other words, a house you buy, move into, and live in. Housing can be a good investment if it's purchased to rent out to a tenant. However, landlording is a whole other topic that's beyond the scope of this book, so I'm not going to talk about it. There are tons of great resources on that topic, go read one of them. The Rule of 150. This all begs the question, does it ever make sense to buy rather than rent? The math may make it seem like the answer is no, but everyone has to live somewhere. And obviously, in an extreme case where a mortgage costs $1 a month and rent is $1 million, then buying would make sense despite the extra costs. What is the tipping point where the decision to rent becomes the decision to buy? A real estate broker would tell you that if the monthly mortgage payment equals the rent of an equivalent place, then it makes sense to buy and pay yourself rather than paying a landlord. However, this conveniently ignores all the ownership costs we discussed. We know now that for the average American family, the cost of buying, owning, insuring, and selling a home equals the interest costs for a typical mortgage over a 9-year period. We also know that in the first 9 years of a standard 30-year mortgage, around 50% of your total payment goes toward interest, while the rest goes toward paying down the principal. In order to figure out when it makes sense to buy, we have to take the interest, add the extra costs of owning that home, and compare that to the rent you'd be saving. This is where the Rule of 150 comes from. Since the extra ownership costs are approximately equal to the interest of a typical mortgage over 9 years, and the interest is approximately 50% of your mortgage payment during that time, you have to multiply your monthly mortgage payment by 150%. This is how much your house will actually cost per month, once all expenses are factored in. If that Rule of 150 monthly cost is higher than your rent, then it makes sense to rent. If it's lower, then it makes sense to buy. The moral of the story isn't to never buy a house, it's to math shit up before you do. At the time that we were looking for a home, my Rule of 150 number was way higher than what I was paying in rent, $850 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment. So after mathing shit up, I said no thank you to the housing market and kept my money. What do rich people do with their money? The math made sense, but this opened up an unexpected can of worms. If I wasn't going to blow my savings on a house like everyone else, what was I supposed to do with it? Nothing in my background could provide guidance, so for a brief period, I felt lost. Then I decided to start learning how rich people did things. When it came to managing money beyond paying for food and rent, I was clueless, and my parents were clueless as well. I had to start looking for answers, and who knows better how to grow their money. To learn what they knew, I read. I spent countless hours in libraries, checking out book after book and reading Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. This was the start of a nearly decade-long fascination with rich people that eventually culminated in my becoming one of them. What struck me most was how much conflicting information was out there. Some of these authors advocated buying houses, others advised renting instead. Some started companies while others played the stock market. It was a dizzying landscape of information that took me many years to sift through and come up with a pathway to wealth. But I did discover a path, a mathematically reproducible one. While I've spent the first third of this book talking about the lessons I learned about money from poverty, now it's time to turn to the lessons about money I learned from the rich. The first lesson came from Robert Kiyosaki, in his best-selling book Rich Dad Poor Dad. In it, he claims, and I'm paraphrasing here, poor people buy stuff. The middle class buys houses. Rich people buy investments. Rich people buy investments. Well, I thought, while I was more than happy to be middle class, it certainly didn't hurt to learn how to invest, right? I called up my bank and made an appointment for the very next day. Chapter 9 Summary. Housing is expensive to own. When you factor in the additional costs of buying and owning a house outside of the mortgage, it can eat up the majority of your housing gains. To get a more accurate estimate of your housing costs, use the rule of 150. Take your monthly mortgage payment and multiply it by 150%. If that rule of 150 monthly cost is higher than rent. Otherwise, buy. Always math shit up before you buy. Poor people buy stuff. The middle class buys houses. Rich people buy investments. Chapter 10. The Real Bank Robbers. Imagine this. You're sitting at your local bank, chatting with a salesperson about how to invest your retirement money, when a group of armed men burst in. They're wearing trench coats, and one of them is obviously Keanu Reeves, so, you know, your typical Wednesday in LA. Whoa, you should, totally give me your wallet. Keanu slurs at you while slow-motion cartwheeling around the lobby. You've seen a movie or two, so you recognize that a heist is underway, but there's a twist. The bank robbers aren't the real villains in this scene. That would be the nice salesperson sitting in front of you. The armed men just want your wallet. That'll cost you $60 and the time and inconvenience of replacing your credit cards and ID. The bank wants your savings, specifically, a percentage of it, every year, forever. The real bank robbers work for the bank. The power of more. The main challenge for a young person who has just started full-time work is the art of adulting. Paying bills, finding a place to live, cooking, that sort of thing. For me, It was adjusting to the shock that the money I earned was mine to keep. That's a whole lot of cokes. It was mind-blowing. Right out of college, my money management approach was simple. Income went into my checking account and was then reluctantly spent on necessities like food and rent. After 6 months, my contract job converted into a full-time position, and I learned about fancy things like employer-based retirement accounts, which we will discuss in Chapter 12, that I was now eligible for. When I found out that my work would give me extra money with an employee matching program, I immediately signed up and quickly realized I had to start making decisions about how to invest that cash. That's how I found myself sitting down with a dude from my bank. What he told me didn't exactly inspire confidence. He kept recommending me this one mutual fund run by the bank but couldn't answer basic questions about it. So, this fund invests in stocks? Yes. Which ones? Those are determined by the fund manager. How does the fund manager know which stocks to pick? He uses an algorithm to select them. Can I see this algorithm? Unfortunately, number. It's proprietary. Okay. I sat back in my chair, suspicion blaring like an air raid siren in my head. How do you know this manager knows what he's doing? Well, he runs a mutual fund, so he must be pretty smart. That's not answering the question. What would you like me to do to convince you? I'd like to meet him. The bank salesperson scoffed. Yeah, that's not happening. So, let me get this straight, I replied, reaching for my jacket. You want me to trust my money to a person I've never met, can never meet, using a proprietary algorithm to pick stocks that will never be explained to me? Look. The salesperson bolted upright, sensing correctly that he was not making a sale today. Most people don't have a problem with this kind of setup. I walked out of his office and never looked back. One perk of being an engineer is that I've developed the habit of checking and double-checking the math before making any financial decisions. So I knew which products had the highest commission rates, incentivizing the banking officer to peddle them to unsuspecting customers. The mutual fund he was trying to sell me that day paid the highest commission of all. Not only that, when I dug in, I found that the fund I was being pushed toward wrapped multiple funds all run by the same bank, each with its own manager into one super fund. The super fund manager would have gotten a cut as well, and the salesperson would have gotten a commission on top of that. How many people in this bank would have been leeching off my money if I had listened to him? When percentages beat dollars. Around that time, I noticed what might be the biggest difference between how lower and middle class people think versus how rich people think. The lower and middle classes are obsessed with adding to their wealth, getting an education or a higher paying job, that kind of thing. Rich people are obsessed with growing their wealth. They generally don't talk about how much they make as a dollar amount, but rather as a percentage of their net worth. I only make $6 an hour, a poor person says. I only made 3% last year, a rich person laments. When you're poor, percentages mean nothing. 10% growth is meaningless when you have no money after all. 10% of $0 is $0. The vast majority of investors are people like you and me, working stiffs trying to improve their savings, starting off with a few $1,000 at most. A percentage point is worthless, because 1% of $1,000 is just $10 a year. Who cares? But to the people running these mutual funds, 1% is a lot of money. An equity fund I just chose at random has a management fee of 1.7%. That is, they charge 1.7% of the net value of your investment to select which stocks and bonds to put your money in. To an individual customer, that 1.7% seems like no biggie, but here's the thing, that apathy is the exact reaction the bank is hoping for. At the time of this writing, this particular fund had assets under management of $700 million. To them, 1.7% is worth almost $12 million each and every year. And each of those $12 million is handed over by someone saying, "Hey, who cares about 1.7%? Percentage points matter." That was one of the first lessons I learned from rich people that helped me to become one of them. What exactly are you paying for? When I started learning about investing, I thought it was about picking individual stocks, grabbing up Apple shares at $10 and later selling them at whatever ridiculously high price they're trading at now. But that felt uncomfortably close to betting on horses at a racetrack, and I do not, nor will I ever, gamble. I've seen firsthand how that particular vice can wreck people's lives, and my dad taught me that it's one of the most expensive addictions you can get. You can drink only so much alcohol before you pass out, but with gambling you can lose your entire life savings. So, stock picking never sat right with me. That's when I learned about index investing. I first heard about it from best-selling author J.L. Collins, author of The Simple Path to Wealth and founder of JLCollins.com. I've since met Jim and had the opportunity to thank him in person for teaching me about this, because it was the first time investing ever made sense to me. Every day people like us get up, brush our teeth, and go to work. That labor, whatever it is, makes money for our employers. No one can tell whether the work I do for my company is more valuable than the work someone else does for theirs. All we know is that money is being made. Index investing takes the guesswork out of trying to predict which company will rise or fall, and instead bets on the total growth of the stock market. That, I could get behind. In any given race, I'd have no idea which horse is going to win or lose, so I'd never bet on any individual horse. But would I bet on the casino? Absolutely. Because no matter which horse wins or loses, the casino makes money. Index investing allows you to bet on the casino. Your investments can't go to zero. What's everyone's biggest investing fear? Having all their money disappear, right? At least, that was my biggest fear, or the guy in charge of my stocks picks a bunch that go bankrupt. Index investing doesn't have this problem. Since the index owns all companies, it's impossible for it to crash to zero. Individual companies may go bankrupt, but unless every single company goes bankrupt at the same time, the index never hits zero. And if it does, the aliens have probably invaded, Independence Day style, and who cares about your 401k balance then? Index investing also has an elegant built-in barometer in that it owns shares weighted by market cap. In other words, If a company is worth more, the index owns more shares of that company, and vice versa. This is the most intuitive way of creating a gauge for the stock market as a whole, which is why most major indexes, like the S&P 500, which tracks the 500 biggest companies in the stock market, are constructed like this. That means that when a company releases a cool new smartphone and their stock soars, the index will automatically pick up more shares. And when another company steps in it and their stock plummets, the index will dump shares. For the S&P 500, once a company drops in value from number 500 to number 501, it's dropped from the index altogether. J.L. Collins brilliantly described this as a self-cleansing mechanism, and that's exactly what it is. Owning the index means you only own the biggest, healthiest companies and makes sure you get rid of shares of bad companies before they hit zero. Note that the only major American index not to use this methodology is the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is price-weighted rather than market cap-weighted. Index investing lowers fees. One of the most frustrating things about evaluating actively managed mutual funds is that they don't explain how they pick their stocks. They'll throw around terms like proprietary algorithm or high alpha and low beta, but at the end of the day the fund manager's not going to tell you, because if they did they'd be out of a job. The power of indexing is how simple it is. You could probably run an index fund yourself. Just throw all the companies in the stock market into a spreadsheet, sort by market cap, and pick the top 500. Done. You've just created an index fund. And because it's so simple, there's no fund manager to pay. In the United States, actively managed mutual funds charge MERS, management expense ratio fees, north of 1% annually. In Canada, it's even worse, with a typical mutual fund charging around 2%. But a typical index fund tracking the American stock market, NYSE, VTI, charges only 0.04%. That's 25 times lower than the fee for an actively managed one. The sneaky thing about management fees is that you don't get a bill at the end of the year. If you did, you would say, "Wait, I have to pay $1,000? For what?" And then you would call up your bank for an angry conversation. Instead, that fee is taken out of your investments silently, every month. You never get a bill and you never see those charges broken out in a statement. That fee is baked in. The intent is to quietly take small amounts out of your pocket each month and hope you won't notice. In fact, you can't even see the fees unless you compare a managed fund to an index fund. This is 5 years of the S&P 500's price history, from 2013 to 2018. After 5 years, that 1% really adds up. For a person investing $10,000 at the beginning of 2013, they're giving up $900, or almost 10% of their initial investment. Imagine how many cans of Coke you could buy with that. And this effect just gets worse as time goes on. 1% may not seem like much right now, but over a typical retirement time frame of 25 years, it snowballs. For that same person investing $10,000 over 25 years, this adds up to $13,500. This isn't even Coke money anymore, that's more than their initial investment. Index investing beats most actively managed funds. And here's the most infuriating part: those actively managed funds charging those high fees aren't even good. If you were paying someone thousands of dollars to paint your house, you'd expect it to be painted. If you were paying someone thousands of dollars to fix your car, you'd expect it to be fixed. But just because you're paying a mutual fund manager doesn't mean they'll make you money. They get paid whether their fund goes up or down. Think about that for a second. If your job was to manufacture chairs, and on your first day you inadvertently started a fire, destroying some chairs, you'd have managed to manufacture negative chairs. Do you deserve to get paid? Probably not. Do you deserve to keep your job? Probably not. But that's the deal many fund managers have. If they do a good job or do a bad job, they still get paid by you. And for all these fees, what value do you get? Turns out, not much. If you were to poll all active managers who are trying to outguess the stock market, you might expect about 50% to have beaten the index and 50% to have underperformed. But that's not the case, and the reason is the management fees. Active managers don't work for free. That means they have to beat the index by 1–2% just to make up for their own fees. Would you like to know how many active managers manage to beat the indexes after fees in any given year? 15%. That's right. Only 15% of active managers manage to beat their benchmark indexes after fees. And because there's no reliable way to tell which of the active managers will turn out to be among that 15%, there's no reliable way to pick which actively managed mutual funds will outperform, especially if the fund manager won't even meet with you. That's when I realized it was really very simple. Index investing beats 85% of actively managed mutual funds. How to steal from Wall Street. If you ever want to see a banker sweat, try this: walk into your bank, ask to see a salesperson, and ask to put your savings into index funds. It's the funniest thing ever. Armed with the knowledge of why index funds outperform actively managed funds, I did exactly that. I had done my homework. I knew the literature and research cold. I knew the statistics. I had looked up the commission the salesperson would earn on an index fund, precisely $0. So, I was expecting an amusing spectacle. And boy did I get it. That salesperson spun story after story about why I was making a huge mistake, and I slammed down chart after chart onto his desk proving him wrong. Eventually, he resorted to outright lying. This account, he claimed, couldn't purchase those types of investments. But after I asked to speak to his supervisor, he relented. I got my account set up, and I invested in my index funds. Here's the deal: Wall Street hates index funds. Inside those shiny glass skyscrapers is basically a giant collection of stock traders. They have thousands of analysts working long hours, poring over the press releases and financial statements of every publicly traded company. They then feed this information in the form of tip sheets to traders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Those traders then place orders based on that information. If that info suggests a company's stock is trading below its true value, then the traders place a buy. If that info suggests it's trading above its true value, they place a sell. This is an oversimplification of a complex system, of course, but at the end of the day Wall Street's job is to price how much a company's shares are worth and to make money if they find a discrepancy. The effect of all this activity is the day-to-day movements of each stock's price, as well as the overall movement of the stock market as a whole. Over time, this will cause a company's share price to reflect what that company is truly worth. However, someone has to pay all these people to do this work. That's where actively managed mutual funds come in. By setting it up so the fund charges a percentage of all assets under management, and tricking investors into thinking that a percentage point or two isn't a big deal, Wall Street manages to make money whether their traders guess correctly or not. The managers and their staff get paid with your money regardless of whether they do a good job. Index investing is different. When you bet on the entire stock market, you are taking advantage of all the work those traders are doing trying to research and price out each individual stock in that index. And because there's no fund manager, you don't pay them or the legions of staffers who work for them. When you use index investing, you are getting money back from Wall Street. I left my bank that day with this strange sense of satisfaction. When I sat down in that salesperson's office, he had every intention of screwing me. He was the robber? But when I left, I was. Chapter 10 Summary. Index investing allows you to invest in all companies at once rather than trying to pick out the winners. Indexes can't crash to zero. Index funds have lower fees. Index funds beat 85% of all actively managed mutual funds after fees.